Okay, so today is the fourth day of studying the concept of consciousness. Today I'm going to read the article on Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. Yesterday I stopped at the chapter 3, and actually I was reading the article and I didn't finish because of the electricity. So there was a crash of electricity, and I thought that I lost the whole stream, but fortunately, when electricity was reestablished, I got on the internet and Zoom saved the whole stream, and that's why I uploaded it yesterday in full length. But I didn't finish. I mean, I didn't say bye and subscribe to my channel and all these stupid things. Anyway, so yesterday I was reading the third chapter. And after that, I got through the fourth and the fifth chapters. So I already read all of these fast. I didn't ponder on each paragraph, on each sentence. I was just reading fastly and trying to figure out what was written here, trying to understand. But in whole, I spent probably 30 minutes, maybe an hour, maybe an hour. Yeah, I guess an hour, like for reading each chapter. No, like 30 minutes for the fourth chapter, and 30 minutes for the fifth. And now I'm going to briefly describe what was going on there. I'm not going to stop on any particular concept, just going through the names of paragraphs, whatever. The descriptive question: what are the features of consciousness? So the first person and the third person data. The basic idea is that consciousness, I perceive it, like for me, again, I interpret it in my personal way. I'm aware that I may make some mistakes since I didn't pay attention too much to what I was reading. My goal now is to understand better what actually was there. If I make a mistake, that's okay. I don't I don't need to memorize everything. I just need to understand what I'm reading and be able to connect it to my own experience. So the first person and the third person. The first person is like my personal perception, so how I understand consciousness, and the third person, it's like data collected by somebody else and analysis of this data. And it makes very little sense since this descriptive what's the descriptive question. So the whole point is here that what we try to describe, it's almost impossible to describe. So to have an experience of consciousness, you have to be conscious. Otherwise, no matter how well we may elaborate the description, it's still impossible to guess. It's like you may be blind, and if I describe you what seeing means, you may compare it with all sorts of, you may create all sorts of mental pictures, and you may be able even to describe what is seen. But if you haven't seen anything, it makes very little sense. So the whole experience is different from the description. And the first person and the third person data. So the first person data about consciousness, it's what you really experience, and the third person data, it's some knowledge which you may get from other sources. But there are probably some more details, but I guess for me it's not important here. So the description may be also like have qualitative character. So qualia, like raw feels. Raw feels, it's basically raw feels. It's senses, like what is consciousness. We may describe it in terms of our feelings. So to be conscious, to be aware, means to see, to be able to see, to be able to hear, to be able to touch, to smell, to taste things. And these raw feelings, raw feels, they give you a certain understanding of what does it mean to be conscious. And in this case, we of course can say that, a rock is conscious, since it can't have feelings. Maybe it can, but we don't know. It's like it looks as if you have to have eyes, otherwise there's no way to see. And such some creatures or non-organic entities have no eyes, like a flower, for example. It can't see, but it probably may touch or may absorb certain sunlight and transform it into its leaves. And so it has certain perception. It may be conscious of its own growth and its own transformation. But the level, like maybe on a microscopic level, but maybe there are some certain, whatever, some atoms or subatomic particles which are interacting with each other and create some kind of consciousness. Anyway, so qualitative character, raw feels. The main idea is that the consciousness, it's this experience of having certain feelings, and to create consciousness, if we are attempting to create it, so it's to make something that can feel certain emotions, not just emotions, but also like qualia, meaning like to see, to hear, to observe information, and to interact with the world through raw feels. And this, what it is like, I actually dismissed this idea when I was talking about the second chapter of this article, but now yesterday I was thinking about it a little bit deeper, and I realized it's so powerful. I mean, what it's like to be a bat. You can really understand it. So you may describe it, you may have a rough understanding, but to feel these echo-locators, to feel, to be your consciousness centered on your auditory system, and to have a different auditory system, it's impossible to understand how it feels. And the same like with rock, for example, it may have certain feelings, and it's, you may imagine or suggest that to be a rock is just to, like, it may have consciousness, but its consciousness is so primitive, it's just it it has no senses, but it's still like, for a rock, you can't say that rock uh, doesn't have okay, you may say it, of course, you may say whatever you like. So I'm trying to uh, like understand this idea of what it is like to be something, and if some organism has consciousness, it's more about like how it describes its experience than what is the actual experience, since the actual experience, it's impossible to understand the actual experience unless you have the same senses, the same, unless you are basically the same organism. So I'll never be able to understand what it is like to be a cat, since a cat perceives the world in a different way. It doesn't have certain parts in its brain, and it has a different body structure. And for me, I may imagine that for a cat, being a cat means something like this. So you don't think you live in present all the time, whatever. So I may even describe it perfectly. I may write a novel, like 1,000-page novel, about what it is like to be a cat, but it doesn't mean I have an experience. It's just a description. In the same way, a cat can't imagine what does it mean to be a human, right? It can just have certain ideas. It can look at the human and like think, oh, this is like probably something like me, right? So, but a little bit more, a little bigger and a little bit more stupid, since I am a cat, the smartest thing in the universe. Anyway, so this question, what it is like, it's kind of an interesting question. I guess I will think about it a little bit more to understand the nature of consciousness. Phenomenal structure. Phenomenal structure, like the world, this all phenomenology, it's, I guess, after Kant, they developed many philosophical schools and theories. Like in Kantian philosophy, there's noumenon and phenomenon. And the world, we don't know the world since it's the thing in itself. We only know its phenomenal structure, phenomenal properties, which we know through our senses and because of our reason. But we don't have an access to the world itself. So it's impossible to know the world since our intellect is limited. In the whole book, The Critique of Pure Reason, it's basically an attempt of Kant to prove that our intellect and our senses aren't sufficient to describe and understand the world in itself. And the world is different from anything we can imagine, since all we can imagine, all we can see, all we can touch, all we can perceive, it comes to us through our senses. And this is like not what it is. So it's just a perception. So whatever I see here, it's like my mind creates a certain picture. My mind creates sounds which I hear. Like sounds are here, but it doesn't mean that I really hear the sounds. I hear the description of something which I call a sound, but the real sound is like the sound in itself. And the real, like I see the computer, it's my mind creates a picture of the computer, but I don't see the real computer since I am limited by my eyes. So probably if I had like super vision, I'll see something else that I can see right now. This when I look at the computer. And the same with all senses, and the same with intellect. So you can't have a certain understanding of the world. You may have certain understanding, of course, but you can't know exactly what it is to be the world, or to be a rock, or to be any object. You don't know what it's like to be a human being unless you know, dedicate certain amount of time to studying yourself. Anyway, phenomenal structure. So phenomenal, like the world as it appears to us, right? In consciousness, it's like I don't remember exactly what's written here, and I'm not gonna, as I said, to talk about it too much. It's just I'm trying to remember what I was reading. Subjectivity, right? Another notion sometimes. Okay, I'm not going to read it now. Once again, subjectivity, that the world is and consciousness is mostly subjective. So we may have, yeah, and this subjectivity, I guess, it's about, we may imagine a triangle, or we may see a triangle, or we may see any object. And when you see an object, like the question is, do we have the same experience or it's different? Yeah, and there were, like, yeah, I even wrote them down. So they were the phenomenal eyes. It's about phenomenal. It's not about subjectivity. It's more about phenomenal structure. So there's a thin and thick theory. And thin theory, it says that when you perceive something, it's like if somebody else perceives the same thing, it's the same perception. So there's no difference. And thick theory says that no, it's like you always bring some subjective element, and whatever you perceive, it's not only about the experience, it's also about your personality and about your, you give something to the perception. In other words, once again, we watch the same movie and we have different perception of the movie. We have different ideas associated with this movie. We have different feelings while we're watching it. or we read a book or we read an article and somebody just reads and doesn't even understand what he or she reads, and somebody else may read and have certain like different understanding. And it's not just about, this is a very complex thing. So when we read an article, of course we have different perceptions, so each word is different to some degree. It's depends on our experience, how we perceive certain words. But when we look at something simple, like a triangle, so does it mean that our consciousness, it's like what there is just a triangle, and having an experience of seeing the triangle is going to be the same experience for everybody. And this is according to thin theory. So it's you may add some thoughts to this experience, but they're relatively unimportant. When you look at the triangle, again, when you focus your attention, like what's going on, what you are conscious of, it's the same as everybody else who looks at the triangle. And like thick theory says, no, it's not the same. It's very different for all people. And subjectivity, of course, like consciousness, yeah, it's impossible to explain. Like I'm trying to use language when I try to describe consciousness. What I'm trying to describe is my experience, what I see, what I hear, what I think. It may be my stream of consciousness, language, how it all emerges out of whatever my perceptions, and it's all about this experience. But I use language and I'm trying to describe something that is impossible to describe. So if you have consciousness, you may have the same experience, and then you may know like what it is to have consciousness. But imagine that you don't have consciousness. Imagine that you are a rock, and I'm trying to describe to you like, what it means to have certain experience. So unless you have the same experience, you don't know. And when you have even the same experience, you probably also won't be able to understand it in the same way as I can understand it, or feel the same emotions which I feel, right? So we may like do 20 push-ups right now, and you'll feel differently, I'll feel differently. And if I tell you that doing 20 push-ups every day for half a year will make your body strong and will give you a lot of energy, you may and you may start doing that, and you feel tired and you stop doing that, or you continue doing that, and you have this experience, but it may be different from you, and you may not feel a lot of energy. You may feel weak and tired. It sounds very silly. It's insufficient example. Anyway, self-perceptual organization, don't even want to touch on it. Unity, like unity of consciousness. Intentionality and transparency. Yesterday I've learned the word transparency. I thought about it, sounds like integrity or like transparency. In the context which I heard the word, it was about like some experience, but I never knew the exact meaning of the word. And yesterday I learned that it's just when a let's say when a window or a glass is transparent, you just can see through it. And the same about like a person. So when your language is transparent, it's just language which is easy to understand. And the transparency, yeah, it like okay, I don't know, doesn't matter. Let's go on. Dynamic flow, and it's about William James and stream of consciousness. I very like this idea of stream of consciousness, and I think that there are certainly two types of experience which we have. And for some people, just to perceive what's going on around, like their consciousness is directed outside, and they live in kind of outside world. They don't pay attention to their thoughts. And some people may just live in kind of opposite way. So you don't pay attention to much what's going on around, but you've focused on your thoughts, and you may experience many things which are impossible to share with people who outwardly oriented, since when you like have this experience. Like for me, every day I try to pay attention to everything what's going on inside. And then we miss lots of things which are going outside. And it seems as if it were different every day. So new ideas. This week, for example, I'm studying the concept of consciousness, and I'm trying to understand it. I read books. I'm trying to think about it as much as I can. I watch some videos, and I know that my stream of consciousness is just shifts to. Doesn't mean that it's different stream of consciousness, but this idea, it brings something to my stream of consciousness and it makes it different, and I see something that I couldn't see before. Whereas if I oriented, like if I focus on what's going on around and dismiss what's going on inside, it may be I may have lots of feelings and emotions and memories associated with my experience, like when I meet people or when I go somewhere or when I'm engaged in certain actions. And yeah, I guess both are important, but just my experience, I'm living mostly in my stream of consciousness. So for an observer, for somebody who will look at my life from outside, is going to be just usual life, nothing special. Just I don't do too much, like lots of things. I just sit at home, work on the internet, watch some videos, read some books, write something, do certain exercises. But it's like it looks not different from any other human being. Whereas inside there's so rich experience. So every day I get through countless ideas, and my stream of consciousness is like it's always bombarded with some brilliant ideas, and uh, I don't have enough time just to think about what I'm doing. And mostly, yeah, I'm living in my thoughts more than I live in the outer world. So for me, like I interact with people quite rarely, and most of the interactions which I have, I basically study these interactions as well as study myself. So I try to think before I go, like speaking clubs. Once a week, I have two speaking clubs, and I think about these speaking clubs way more than I actually have these real events. So I have like two events for 4 hours, like 2 hours on Sunday, 2 hours on Saturday, and I'm thinking about these events like for 10, 20 hours a week, and I spend a lot of time just reading and developing the concepts. And for me, this sort of activity, like working on the concepts and developing my understanding, it's way more important than the event itself. So when I play this event in my imagination before the event or afterward to uh, make sense of it, it's what I like to do more than like to engage in a real conversation and you know feel all sorts of emotions and to have certain experience. But yeah, I wouldn't say that it's always the case. Sometimes I like what's going on there, but most of the time I see myself being focused on like on the inside, the stream of consciousness. And the more I focus on it, the more I understand that it's when we look at the world, yeah, for when we think about consciousness and experience. So we may say that our experience is basically what we perceive, and for like the world itself, it may be quite the same for most people. So if we live in the same town, we see the same places, we uh, go from one place to another, we communicate with probably like the same people, and it looks kind of the same. But if we, let's say, focus on our streams of consciousness, they're so different. And we may live in the same town, but we have a totally different worlds in terms of our thoughts and ideas. And before, like 200 years ago, 100 years ago, when there was no internet, when there was no TV, and when there was just newspapers, so all people had almost the same, like all people lived in almost the same world. So if we live in the same town, we are talking about the same events and the same things. We are working on the same projects, and it's not the same exactly, but it's similar. And we know what we are doing. We can like have certain discussions about what's going on. And now when we have the internet, everybody, like just we may live in the same city, even in the same house, but we may have different, you know, different perceptions, different streams of consciousness. And what I see on the internet, and I may go on the internet and just my entire stream of consciousness from the beginning of my life to the end may never cross your stream of consciousness, which you will have. Like you may go on the internet, and the pages which you find on the internet, the information you get from it, and the information you put there, it's like it will never cross the information which I get from it and which I put there. And it's so fascinating. I mean, it, from one perspective, it creates a diversity, like people lose contacts with each other, so they like doing different things, they're thinking about different things, they're talking about different things. It's hard to find some unity, it's hard to find some common ground. But from the other side, it's so bloody amazing, since you are not restricted by your environment. So before, again, if you want to become a philosopher and you live in a small town and you have a small library, it's almost impossible for you to reach the outer world. So you have to go to the capital of your country, or you have, like, it's impossible to find people who really engage in the same activity. So there's not so many options for you. But when you have the internet and you want to become a philosopher, so you basically may reach everybody, and you may get all books which are there. You may like you may become the greatest philosopher just by focusing your attention on the task and just developing this, yourself, your character, reading about all about different philosophers, practicing certain exercises to improve your intelligence, to improve your understanding, studying different concepts and ideas, like learning all sorts of stuff, and developing your virtues, becoming wise. And all this you may have just by getting access to the internet and getting certain information which is required for you to grow as a philosopher. And it's not about only like a philosopher. You may become anybody whom you want to become. And stream of consciousness, yeah, this whole idea that you may have a different stream of consciousness, and other people have different streams of consciousness. But when you live in outside world, it's like it's almost the same thing for most people. But our inner experience, our inner consciousness, it's different so much. And now it's like it's even more different with the internet. I mean, it's so exciting to think about it from this perspective. Anyway, so let's go on. Today I'm going to read this fifth chapter, the explanatory question: how can consciousness exist? And I don't know how far I'm gonna go. Let's just see. Yeah, I decided, yesterday I was thinking a lot about this idea to developing this studying stream. I mean, not just recording a few hours a day, but learning how to do it for 5 hours a day. I remember when I was a kid and a teenager, and quite recently, not just kid, a teenager, in my 20s and the early 30s, I could sit at the computer for 10, 15 hours a day and just play video games. And for me, what I'm doing right now, it's also a kind of playing. So it's a kind of game, but it's a different game. It's a linguistic game. And it's endless. Like in video games, usually there was just 4 games which I played. I played many games, but there was the 4 which I mastered and which I became an expert in. And I played these games like thousands of times. So it was StarCraft, the first StarCraft. Well, I played the second StarCraft, but very little, maybe few hundred games, maybe 1,000 games. I like for half a year I played the second StarCraft, and then I gave up. 2012, by the way, from spring to the summer. The first StarCraft. Then I played Warcraft third, and it was Warcraft Frozen Throne, and there I played like 2000, I guess 2000 games. When I played from the beginning when the game appeared in 2003. I learned to play, and I was playing on a. I was in 100 in top 100 on European server at 2005, I guess. Yeah, I had the 50th level, and I played 2,000 games, even more. There was like 1,500 wins and something like 1,300 losses, like even maybe almost 3,000 games. And then I lost my account. It was stolen. I didn't have an email tied to this account, and it was stolen. I was so disappointed back then. So and I played like every day the same game. And the point is, you play the same game, you get better at it, you get better, but it's essentially like you repeat the same actions, but you do it faster. You understand better how to, when to fight, when to pull back, what kind of actions you have to do. And another game was Dota, and I played it for a couple of years. And another game was Legion today. It's also like maps in Warcraft. And all these games, once again, it's like 30-minute or maybe an hour sometimes. And then you start playing the game again. And then like every new game is just short, but you learn how to be good at it by playing the same game over and over and over. And here what I'm doing is like playing the game. So for me, the game is just, this 5-hour frame, or maybe now it's just 2 hours. Since I see that I can do it for 5 hours, it just makes me think too much, and I don't want to get mad in the next few months just by being engaged in this. But for me, it's like a game. So now what I perceive, my emotions, my feelings, I feel always excited when I record these videos. Is just I may have certain. I become the stream of consciousness. When I record these videos, I no longer have feelings. I no longer I have feelings, but my feelings aren't important. So what I feel and what I perceive, it's like the stream of consciousness. So I think, and my task here is to verbalize everything what's going on through my mind. And I know that the stream of consciousness is not just a stable thing. So when you learn to, no, when you work on it, when you study it, when you pay attention to it, it just gets better. And that's the whole idea. So it gets better, and at some moment it gets to the point where it's just crazy. It's impossible to describe what's going on. But you see, you perceive. It's imagine that you live, like again, you may live in a country and have certain work, right? And you are tied to a certain place, and you're always in this place. So you fall asleep in a certain place, you wake up in a certain place, you go for a work, you have a routine, and most of your life is kind of routine. And imagine uh, stream of consciousness, it's also, it looks like this. But imagine that you wake up somewhere and you go somewhere during the day, and then you fall asleep in a different place, and then and you not just go by foot, but you fly to a different country, you live there, next day you go in a different country, or you live there, you go somewhere, like you discover something, you may stay for a couple of days, but then you go somewhere else. And imagine the whole life like that. Like you don't sit at one place, you just go not just around the globe, but you go different stars and the different galaxies. And that's what's going on in my consciousness. Like this is my experience. So every day, like I sit here in small town, 500,000 people in Russia, but my conscious experience is just I'm jumping from one star to another, and just having such an enormous, rich stream of consciousness, ideas, thoughts. And it's like I wouldn't identify with these thoughts. So sometimes it's like I'm just read something and wow, this is so deep. It makes me feel so great. It makes me understand certain things. And then I write my own stuff. I write my own, thoughts, and I pay attention more to my thoughts. So my journals, for example, which I No, I'm going to refer to my journals quite often here in this podcast. So there's 1,029 notes which I made during 8 years, since 2008 to 2016, and I published these notes. Like it took me 3 years to publish them. I was making these notes in my journals, so it's like, I'm writing in my journals, and when I started studying English, I decided that I'm going to publish everything that I wrote in Russian. And these 1,029 notes is my writing in Russian. And at first, it was my experience. So what I was describing, it was my experience, what I was doing, whom I communicated with, where I went, maybe what I, sometimes there were some feelings, sometimes there were some conversations. But at first, there were few thoughts and I didn't think too much. But then, after a couple of years, my description shifted to the stream of consciousness. So whatever was going on in my life, I described not what I was doing, but what I was thinking about. And I like developed so sophisticated description of whatever was going on that at the I guess at the end of 2015, I created this character, Volodymyr Zastavkin, and I basically could describe all events, but not just events, the stream of consciousness. So uh, like every day I could just write a fairy tale. And in this fairy tale, I basically was communicating with some ancient philosophers like Epicurus or Diogenes or, who was there, Buddha. And it's just a fairy tale, but it's like my experience, since I can read a book and then I may have thoughts during the day for, for an hour, for 2 hours, for 5 hours. And then I just write a short story, and I could write these stories every day. They were so poetic and so exciting for me. But then, yeah, I shifted to English and started from the beginning, just writing some bullshit. And mostly it was, again, centered on my experience. And only now I'm getting closer to be able to describe what's going on in my thoughts. And it's still so cheap and weak. And yeah, I guess I need more, like 10 years more to get to the point when I stopped when I was writing in Russian. And I stopped writing in Russian since there was no real, like, I realized that it makes very little sense. Nobody could, like, there were few people who could understand me. And I knew that, the whole language issue, like now there's just there's few 100 million people who speak Russian and who are like native Russian native speakers. And there's like billions of people, like I don't know how many, but there's certainly 2-3 billion people who speak English, not as a first language, but as a second language. Doesn't matter. The main point is that there's more and more people who speak English. English becomes more and more, kind of lingua franca. And I know that if I just use Russian and write stuff in Russian, I don't want to wait until people will be able to translate my writings and understand them. I just want to communicate with the entire world using English. And the idea behind my transformation from Russian to English, there are many reasons, of course. Just what I'm describing now is just one of them. So the idea was that I may have access to the entire population of people, and it's not, if it takes just 10 years to develop my language and bring it to the level where my Russian was at 2016, that's okay. That's like, it's an interesting task. And then when I'll develop my language to this level, I basically will have an access to everybody, like to all world. Whereas if I do it only in Russian, it's still like, and translation is not going to be I know what translation is. I mean, Dostoevsky translated into English. It's not Dostoevsky read in original language. I know that if I'm going to write like amazing stories, my stream of consciousness, whatever, some poems, if I write them in Russian, it's like the people who will have access to them. Yeah, and why I said, like, the problem with my Russian writings is that I don't want to advertise myself. I don't want to, go to the public and say, look, guys, you have to read my books. You have to read my poems. I'm so great poet. I say it often in my writings, but I don't want to sell myself. So, and it seems that I have these sites, I publish everything there, but nobody pays attention. I mean, nobody writes books about my books. Nobody studies me seriously. And I got kind of, I decided that, okay, if there's like out of these 200 million people who are living here, there's nobody who can understand what I'm doing and what I'm writing, I just may shift the language and, find and see whether or not they're like out of these billions people who speak English, if there's somebody who can understand what I'm doing and what's going on in my consciousness. But once again, like experience. So stream of consciousness, like personal experience, it's unique, and it's almost impossible to to describe it. So you have to have the same experience. And what I'm saying right now, so to have the same experience, you basically have to learn yourself for a couple of years at least to get some pale, whatever, to get little sense of what it is to have this stream of consciousness, which is richer. Like again, the same example which I started from, that you may just live in one place, and all your life you may spend in one city, seeing nothing, or maybe you may travel a few times in a foreign country. And in stream of consciousness, you don't need to go anywhere. So you go deep inside, and you may live the same life. So your life may be as rich as a life of somebody who just travels the world, and not just the world, but who goes to different planets and probably different stars and different galaxies. So inside now we have all tools like meditation, writing, thinking, paying attention to your thoughts, all sorts of teachings and books and all sorts of amazing things available for free, and you may get the access to them. And it's like, and to having access to them, it's like the same as having the shuttle, or a personal shuttle, like, or a rocket, and you may just go like take this rocket, go inside, and see that the world inside is way richer than the world outside, even though like you may live in both, of course. What I'm like, but my example, what I'm trying to explain or describe, it's I was living in this outside world, let's call them, outside world, inner world, whatever. I was living in this world for 22 years, for 22 years of my life. And I know what it means and how it feels to be in this world when you have concerns about money, when you have concerns about the relationship, when you have concerns about, your age, your status, your communication, whatever. And like school, responsibility, job. So when you have all these concerns, it's you don't pay attention to what's going on inside, and then suddenly you just, wow, you realize that there's a new world inside, and this world is so different, and it doesn't require anything. I mean, you may discover this world, and then that's all. All you need to do, just discover it once, and then you discover it, like you get into it, and then you go deeper and deeper, and then there may be some problems. Of course, you may just get crazy, since you may decide, okay, outer world uh, completely unnecessary. So you may just go inside on an extreme level, and it may cause some trouble, some problems. But if you manage it, if you still this in the outer world for a certain amount of time, just enough to maintain your body healthy, to maintain your like connections with the world, with some people, right? If you're able to organize this, and then like you may live 1 hour in this world, and 15 hours in the world of your thoughts, and it's so different, man, and it's so exciting, and it's so pity that very few people can see it. I mean, it's almost impossible. Again, it's like when you describe it to somebody who has no experience in that, it's the same as describing like lucid dreams to somebody who never actually had lucid dreams. So I'm kind of an expert in lucid dreams. So I practiced it for, I guess, for these 8 years when I was studying Russian, and after reading Castaneda. being concerned with that. And the highest point was I was able to be in this dream world for half an hour, for half, like, it's, of course I can't say exactly whether it was half an hour, but it felt as if I was there for half an hour, since I did everything possible. And eventually I got bored and I sat and I was thinking, man, it's like the only way, like there's the only one thing which I want now is like to die, since like I'm limitless and there's nothing to do. I just may want something and it immediately happens. And it doesn't make any sense to be in this world of lucid dreams. Like everything is meaningless since I am capable of everything, and any anything which I can imagine instantly just happens. Uh, there's no obstacles. There's no, you don't need to push something. Just everything, whatever you desire, it appears automatically. And then I want to get back to normal world where you're limited, and it's just have certain. It has certain whatever. All right, let's go on. Actually, yeah, I spent the entire hour talking about something that I was thinking about yesterday, right after like reading these other few chapters. So let's start reading the chapter 5th, the explanatory question: how consciousness exists. The how question focuses on explanation rather than description. It asks us to explain the basic status of consciousness and its place in nature. Is it a fundamental feature of reality in its own right? Or does its existence depend upon other non-conscious items, be they physical, biological, neural, or computational? And if the latter, can we explain or understand how the relevant non-conscious items could cause or realize consciousness? Put simply, can we explain how to make something conscious out of things that are not conscious? All right, basically the question how, right? So it's an explanation. It's like why. It's not even how, it's why, right? So no, it's how. Okay, let's read it once again. The how question focuses on explanation rather than description. So explanation of what, right? Description attempts to describe what it is. Explanation, why it is here, and how it operates. What is it? What is its purpose? All right. So explanation rather than description. It asks us to explain the basic status of consciousness and its place in nature. The basic status of consciousness and its place in nature. So we need to explain why do we have consciousness and how it relates to non-conscious items. All right. Is it a fundamental feature of reality in its own right? Or does its existence depend upon other non-conscious items, be they physical, biological, neural, or computational? Okay, let's try to figure out what they want us to say here. So, fundamental feature of reality in its own right. So, what this means is there may be consciousness a priori, and reality is just something that emerges out of consciousness. Or it may be a property of some organisms or some creatures, whatever, or some items like non-conscious items. So there may be a rock revolving around a fireball, and then suddenly on this rock, something appears that surprisingly have consciousness, and before there was no consciousness. And if it appears, how it appears, that's the question. Come, how it comes to existence. How does it come to existence? Does it existence depend upon the non-conscious items? Does it existence depend upon the non-conscious items? So if we have consciousness, now it seems, it looks, at least for me as a conscious being, that my existence, if I perceive myself as consciousness, depends on my body. So without body, I don't know. I can't say. Probably there may be some consciousness, some ghosts or shadows aware of themselves, but it's hard to tell. I may tell only that I have body and I have perceptions and I have consciousness. I can see, I can hear, I can know something, I can be aware that uh, outside of this room there's other world and there are some people and something is going on there. And yeah, it seems it depends on my brain. So my brain creates, or by brain, of course, I don't mean just neurons and their connections. I mean the entire body. So for me, the brain, it's like my body is the brain, the whole body, without, like, of course, if I cut off my hand, I still will be able to perceive things. And probably if I cut my hands and legs, I still will be able to perceive things. But the perception is going to be different. And my perception is going to be limited. So I won't be able to feel, when I touch something, I won't be able to feel certain emotions or certain, you know, I won't be able to get access to senses, to, like, if I don't have arms, and my perception is going to be changed. So again, by mind and by brain, I don't mean just brain, which is inside of my skull. It's more about the entire body. And it seems that consciousness now depends on this body. So if there's no this, if I make a thought experiment and get rid of this body, so if I say, let's suppose that I just kill myself right now, right here, like, will the world exist outside? Like, will it still be there? Will the video continue recording? And I think that it may be a kind of controversial, since this consciousness, my world, will cease to exist. So I think that what's going on right now is going to stop. But your world, for example, you may perceive me and I'm just a part of your world. And from that perspective, there will be something which is still going to be conscious. But this something, you, it's a different thing. It's not my world. So we live in different worlds. Like my world, with all its connections, with all its, things, basically with its stream of consciousness, which is, I guess, the most brilliant thing here. It's like everything what I see, everything what I perceive, everything what I, everywhere where I was, it's not so important. Like my world, it's more about the stream of consciousness, and this stream of consciousness will cease to exist. And the world, therefore, will cease to exist as I describe it, as I see it. And you may still exist in something which you call the world, but it's going to be different world. That's the idea. And consciousness, but consciousness is going to still be there. It will not go anywhere, but it's going to be different consciousness, right? It's not going to be the same. Anyway, sounds very hard, but I'm just trying to speculate on this idea. So does its existence depend upon other non-conscious items, be they physical, biological, neural, or computational? The question is, like, is it material or immaterial? And if it's material, like, show us where it is. So if we open the brain and scan all its neurons and connections, we won't be able to find consciousness, right? We won't be able to find this whole experience or thoughts, or at least we can't find it now. Probably in the future, we eventually will get to that point and we'll be able to reproduce the whole experience of a person, of an individual, just by scanning their brains and putting their like kind of movie on the computer, and you may just watch the whole movie uh, of a person. But you now can watch, like you may watch like my videos which I recorded during the last 4 years in English, and it's like if you watch them all and pay attention, you will get like a similar experience which I had, and but no, it's gonna be different, of course. Yeah, it's not the same as watching everything what I have seen in my life and having the same feelings, right? And having the same thoughts. But when we are able to do that, when we are able to record the kind of the stream of consciousness of an individual placing some device on his head and then giving this device to somebody else, and somebody else may just experience the same stream of consciousness, probably with the same thoughts, not just visual and audio imagery, like items, whatever, but thoughts and feelings. That's going to be very fascinating. And yeah, the question is whether or not we're going to get there. Who knows? Now, in the gap, there was a gap. What was it called? The explanatory gap. So the explanatory gap is the gap between what we know about the world, and when we call it physical, biological, neural, or computational, and what we know about consciousness. So it seems that consciousness is only like it's something that is always here, but at the same time we don't know where, since we know only like somewhere here, or in this body. But we get rid of the body, we get rid of the consciousness. But there's some other consciousness, and they're also here. Wow. I would like to make a little pause and give another idea which I had also yesterday while I was thinking about consciousness, and it was an idea. What was the idea? It just came across my mind, and I was thinking it's going to be exciting to tell it. And as soon as I no, and I lost it. I lost it almost instantly. And that's so fascinating. So there was an idea I wanted to develop it, and I lost it. And yeah, and now I can't find it, and I don't wanna wait until it comes back. I'm gonna go on, and then if it comes back, I'll tell you. But it was a fascinating idea related to this, explanatory gap. All right. And if the latter, if the letter, and if the letter, and the letter means, the letter means that it exists, its existence depends upon other non-conscious items. So if it's so, can we explain or understand how the relevant non-conscious items could cause or realize consciousness? Put simply, can we explain how to make something conscious out of things that are not conscious? In other words, how to build artificial intelligence and robots which are going to be aware and have their own experience. All right, let's read some theories, what they are going to say here. Diversity of explanatory projects. The how question is not a single question, but rather a general family of more specific questions. Great. They all concern the possibility of explaining some sorts of aspects of consciousness. Yeah, I've read it yesterday. I've read the 5. Yeah, now I can remember it. So explanatory gap, it's going to be here, right? Reductive and non-reductive explanation. Prospects of explanatory success. Yeah. All right, so let's now we are going to start today's stream. So now I'm going to go and read the thing which I wanted to read. But anyway, it's good that I commented on the section 5 and talked about the explanatory gap since it makes sense. So the functional question, why does consciousness exist? The functional, like what is it for? Or yeah, if we answer the explanatory question, like how it is it possible, how it came to existence, so we'll probably may answer the functional question as well. But anyway, let's just read what's there. The functional or why question asks about the value or role or consciousness and thus indirectly about its origin. Yeah, I see there's a mistake in the sentence. So the functional or why question asks about the value or role of consciousness. So there should be of instead of or. All right. Yeah, that's the level of English when you read articles on Encyclopedia of Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy and may notice mistakes and not be confused. The functional or why question asks about the value or role of consciousness and thus indirectly about its origin. So the value or role. Okay, does it have a function? And if so, what is it? Does it make a difference to the operation of systems in which it is present? And if so, why and how? If consciousness exists as a complex feature of biological systems, then its adaptive value is likely relevant to explaining its evolutionary origin. Though, of course, its present function, if it has one, need not be the same as that it may have had when it first arose. Adaptive functions often change over biological time. Questions about the value of consciousness also have a moral dimension in at least two ways. We're inclined to regard an organism's moral status as at least partly determined by the nature and the extent to which it is conscious. In conscious states, especially conscious affective states, such as pleasures and pains, play a major role in many of the accounts of value that underlie moral theory. As with the what and how questions, the why question poses a general problem that subdivides into a diversity of more specific inquiries. Insofar as the various sorts of consciousness, for example, access, phenomenal, metamental, and distinct, are distinct and separable, which remains an open question, they likely also differ in their specific roles and values. Thus, the why question may well not have single or uniform answer. Okay, this is an introduction. Let's just find out what's like. Let's just take a closer look at each question and try to think about it a little bit. So the functional or why question asks about the value or role of consciousness and thus indirectly about its origin. All right, the value or role of consciousness. And then going further, does it have a function? And if so, what it is? Does consciousness have a function? What's its purpose? So and what kind of consciousness? Of course, we may take all sorts of consciousness, like to know something, like to be aware, to have knowledge about something. Certainly has a function, right? Knowing gives me some tools to understand what I'm doing and to orient myself in the world, to behave, to survive, right? To adapt to my environment, to find some ways of interacting with other objects in the world. If I take myself as an object, and there's other objects, and when I know when I have sufficient knowledge about these objects, it helps me to interact with them. So this, when consciousness is considered just as awareness or knowledge, it helps to to interact with the environment, assuming that only that it's not this meta consciousness which exists outside, like everywhere. It's just a consciousness which an organism has, and this consciousness helps to organize the environment, or just to orient yourself in your environment. All right, this is one function. But what if it's like self-awareness, let's say, self-consciousness, that I am a conscious object? Does it have a function? Is it the same function? Like, why do I need to be aware that I am this individual who sits here and talks about consciousness? Why do I have to have this self-awareness? And why do I have to have this awareness that I'm mortal, for example, that my consciousness actually limited? What's the purpose of that? Does it make my life different? Does it make my life different from bodies or other creatures which aren't aware? Yeah, it looks like it makes my life different when I look at other animals, cats, dogs, maybe some birds. Yeah, I see that they are incapable of things which I am capable of. So they need environment, right? They need a lot of stuff. Like, their life is totally different from mine, as I described before, like the stream of consciousness. So I might just live in a small room and have experience so rich and amazing, which none of these creatures may have, only because I have this self-awareness, and I have language, and I might create the entire world out of my imagination. Whereas an animal needs certain interactions with the real world, and a lot of interactions. Yeah, maybe the purpose of self-awareness is, but again, it's the same thing: survival, adaptation, different emotions, understanding, right? Maybe there's no function. Like, when we think about the universe itself, does it have a function? The universe, does it have a goal, a certain goal which it's going to achieve? Does it have purpose? No, we can't say that. Well, we may say, of course, we may argue about it endlessly and say universe has a purpose to become completely rational, right? Or to be populated by humans everywhere humans, countless stars, and people who live on Earth, people who live on Mars, people who live on Jupiter. Not people, like some clouds, clouds, objects, whatever. Yeah, but imagine that we will become a multi-planet species or multi-star species. How it's gonna be? Like, you may just travel to the other star, and it may, yeah, it's not going to be humans. Yeah, I suppose that. No, first of all, my views on evolution and on humans in general, I believe that there are certainly, human is just a part of this chain. So there may be different species which are gonna replace humans. Maybe it's just going to be our evolution. So some humans will go extinct, and we'll create a new species which is going to be kind of cyborgs, let's say. And I believe it's come very soon. I mean, uh, so those who will, you know, become cyborgs, they create like a new species, and it's like this species is going to be more, no, it's going to be different from humans, and probably it's going to live longer. Since if you want to have a multi-star species, it's like 100 years, and this flesh, I guess it's inappropriate here. So we have to have some metal bodies and different form of intelligence, intellect. And so I guess we'll transform ourselves and become, we'll live 1,000 years instead of 100, let's say. And you may travel. Like, imagine life like that. So, and now we're talking about consciousness, right? We're not talking about your body, your animal, whatever, feelings, whatever. We're talking about consciousness. Let's suppose that we may put consciousness and into machines, and machines will replace us. We are gonna just, probably we're not gonna extinct. We still are going to live on Earth and do some things here, but machines, they'll discover, different stars and different planets, and there'll be robots, real robots, which will have their own consciousness, which will travel to different stars and build colonies here. And you may be somebody like this robot. So imagine, like, now you're a dumb individual, like a stupid, silly, creature, which like knows very little about what's going on in its life, right? And maybe a lot doesn't matter. You are limited, and you probably are going to die quite soon, right? And imagine that you are somebody like a robot, but you have the same feel. You may not have the same feelings, right? So you can't actually say what it's going to be like to be a robot unless you become a robot. But probably, let's suppose that now you have, no, you know what does mean to feel something, right? Not what does mean to have certain experience, to taste some delicious food, or to have sex, or to read a poem, or to write a poem. And imagine that you may take all this, put into a machine, and the machine will have the same experience. Probably it won't have a sex, okay? Maybe it won't have, it would not be dependent on food, but it may have like kind of emotions of the same kind, or even different emotions of richer kind. So imagine that, like an artificial intelligence. So you have consciousness, you are aware of your existence, you have certain emotions, you have pleasure, and this pleasure, like, it comes not from, you know where it usually comes, but it comes from your intellectual work, and from your intellectual, from your perception of the world. And again, you may travel the whole, different galaxies, create different species, build different civilizations, have communities of many robots, or it's going to be just one robot, but it's going to be one consciousness with populations of different robots. Like we may consider ourselves also, like, from my point of view, this consciousness which we have, it's more like the mind, let's say. So we don't have minds. The mind has all of us, like a species, but there's just this, like, hive mind or whatever. So it's like one big thing, and this one big thing controls all our bodies and what we are doing here. But imagine that there's like artificial mind, or another kind of mind, and it controls like thousands of robots, and each of these robots believe that they're, doing things on their own, but they're controlled by, maybe by human minds. Like if you look at video games, so I may just play video games, and I may have, the whole population of robots controlled by me. So I'm sitting at the computer, and I build armies, I build civilizations, and in these civilizations there are certain, digital digital items, units, which do certain work, which perform certain tasks. And you don't know exactly whether or not they may have their own consciousness. But I know exactly that what I'm doing here, it's like I'm controlling them, and I send them to go somewhere. But they may perceive it not as like somebody else controlling them, but walking on their own way somewhere, and fighting, destroying each other, or building something. Or they may have no consciousness at all. Who cares? Who knows? Nobody actually can say with certainty. But imagine that our species, like, there's, this, I guess, kind of idea of God, like, somebody had the super quantum computer sitting somewhere on the cloud, and playing humans as a civilization, now controlling me, and developing some heroes, right? So it's like Dota. So you play Dota, there are some characters, you pick one, and you just play it, and your goal is to make it like the best character, and to attack other people, and to reach certain goal, to destroy some, some base of the enemy. And so when, my passion about language and, some martial arts, whatever, it was developed. I remember when I was playing video games, I was thinking too much about, what if I am just this character? So instead of, and I was very savvy and keen developing this character. So I was like the greatest player. I mean, playing video games, I liked it so much that I could play, like, overplay almost every. Well, there was few people, of course, who played better. I wouldn't say that I was the best player, but no, it's like the, the feeling when you have a character, you develop it, and then it's like the strongest character, and you may do whatever you like in the game. I always try to project it on my personal life. So, like in Dota, for example, there are some skills, like, uh, not just skills. There are some skills, but there are some features, like, agility, intelligence, and power. And power basically gives you health points. Agility gives you, like, uh, uh, strengthen the speed of your attack, and intelligence gives you mana. And I was thinking, well, what if I just focus, instead of focusing on these artificial characters, in the game, and trying to perfect my, skill of playing the game, I take myself as a character and start developing that. So, like, intelligence, what should I do to develop my intelligence? Reading books, writing, speaking, thinking, studying. Okay, one thing. Uh, Agility. All right, I might just do certain exercises, and yeah, how much? Like, I was working on, like, agility for years, and I'm still working on it. It's like few hours a day. Yeah, it's enough. I don't need too much agility. I might just be like on intellect and power. It's like the same. It's agility and power. It's about doing exercises and gaining, physical confidence. And intelligence, it's more about, developing your knowledge and ideas. And then I started, like, writing my. If you read once again, like here, you have to start from the beginning, and every every note leads to the beginning. So when you go to the beginning, there's many notes. The beginning, it's from 2008, from the April of 2008 to December 2011, and this was the time when I started my daily journal. Yeah, and I'm gonna, like, this beginning. Actually, what I'm doing, I'm editing the whole book. So now there's 1029 notes here, and I I only edited just first 100 notes, or even less. So here, it's like it's what I already edited. So if you go, and I'm gonna, like, uh, expand, not expand, just increase. Like, I'm gonna edit it. So eventually, what's gonna happen if I do the whole work? All these journals, all these notes are gonna appear in the same file. So it is going to be just all going to be all is going to be there on this file at the beginning. But now it's just the first 100 notes or 120 notes, whatever. And yeah, and when you read them one after another, they're basically, uh, I would describe it as rises and falls. So I tried to quit playing video games, and I was, like, focusing on, studying literature, studying poetry, philosophy, writing. But at some moments, I uh, lost control and lapsed back to my behavior. So I was playing for a couple of weeks, for months, and I was basically writing, how can I quit? How can I quit? I have to do something. I tried to encourage myself to go on, to live meaningful life, to stop playing dumb video games. And there was such interesting, not just arguments, but some kind of dialogues, self-dialogues, inner dialogues, when one day I just completely focused on self-learning and growth and developing some intelligence, agility, whatever power. And next day I just give up and play video games, and then like I try to argue with myself, like, and say that it's stupid. Like there's kind of conscience. So my conscience wasn't happy about that and always told me, no, you have to play, you have to stop playing, you have to sit and do your meaningful work. It's so amazing. And then like anyway, so it may be interesting to read. I mean, this whole struggle with developing your character. It's kind of exciting. So I was talking about these robots and civilization, where consciousness will become something else. And yeah, it's quite, when you look at the evolution, when you look at the world from an evolutionary perspective, it makes a lot of sense. So humans came there like few 100,000 years ago, and before there was just other animals, and we we, we may predict that in few 100,000 years, or maybe in few thousand years, or maybe even in few 100 years, we'll become a new species. Something new will maybe, before, the first form of life on Earth, there was no vision, there's no hearing, there's just primitive like type, just worms. And then gradually like vision appeared. Then like not I don't know what appeared first, what emerged first, but I guess like all these senses, our five senses, so they gradually we added something new, evolution added something new, and then we have all this complexity, and our brain is basically a tool which perceives the world and which interprets the world, interprets these senses. So visual experience, auditory experience, what you touch, what you smell, what you taste. And yeah, it seems that probably will add another feeling or another form of perception, another sense. And what it's going to be like, nobody knows. And how it's going to be added, also nobody knows. But it seems like this brain machine interface, when we just put uh, certain whatever robots, not robots, but some devices, when we plug them to our head and have different, but it's again, it looks as if it's going to be the same. So you get certain device, and you may hear something or you may see something, but how to develop a new sense? I mean, it might be something completely different from what we have right now. It's impossible even to imagine, since if we could imagine it, we probably will have it. Imagine that, at some moment in history, if we take evolution seriously, at some moment there was no vision. So vision emerged out of organisms which they could touch, right? They could touch each, like their environment. They could crawl around and get some information about their environment, but it was so limited. There was no vision. Imagine then at some moment vision appeared. It was such a brilliant thing. Imagine you are blind for for entire life, and then after like the age of 50 you just open up your eyes and wow, I was living for 50 years now. Yeah, it's like this ideal platonic cave. uh, it just it uses vision as a kind of you know kind of mental vision or whatever as an example, so trying to give you a sense what it feels like when you have no sense, you have no organ to perceive the world, and then suddenly you start perceiving the world differently. There's new way of perceiving the world, and you never seen that. And in Platonic cave, it's all about intelligence and language and intellectual perception and ideas and forms, Platonic ideal forms, whatever. Like when you have kind of mental eye, your third mental eye, when and what I'm talking about is more like it all related to it. I mean, when you have this stream of consciousness, when you live in your stream of consciousness instead of like living in the world of your perceptions, of your feelings, you may sense what it is like to, you know, to perceive the world. It's like it's kind of higher. So it's on a human hierarchy. It's a kind of higher way of perceiving the world, and it's rare. I mean, it's first of all, it's very hard to attain. It takes lots of time and practice, and you don't know why do you need to attain that. Whenever we talk about it, whenever I talk about it with people, it's uh, it's quite clear that it, for me, that it's impossible, almost impossible, to explain what is meant when I refer to like stream of consciousness and thinking, since all these people have their own ideas about thinking. And whenever I talk about thinking, I don't talk about their ideas of thinking. I'm talking about something that I'm doing right now. So this is thinking, and I know nobody who are able to do that. I mean, I know some people on the internet, of course, but an average, and it's just a part of it. It's not everything. It's more about being aware of what's going on and perceiving your stream of consciousness, and not being attached to it, not being overwhelmed or preoccupied with what you're going to think or what you're going to say. And it's also about it's, when it's on a low level, it's also hard to explain, since you start understanding it only when you reach a certain level. So imagine you're a poet, right? And you want to become a poet, let's say, at the beginning, and you have an inspiration. You read some great poets, and you decide, I'm going to write like them. And you write your own poem, and it's crap. And you don't have certain feelings, right? You may even have negative feelings. You may say it's just it it hurts. Like I see that I'm incapable of writing anything. And then you dedicate 10 years, like reading poetry, writing poetry, reading poetry, writing poetry. Of course, having a lot of all sorts of experience outside, like hanging out with people, or maybe doing some meditations, going somewhere, traveling the world, reading books, whatever, meditating, doing exercises, gaining power, gaining agility, gaining intelligence. But when you get to this higher level, so after 10 years, you just write something, it's brilliant, and you compare it with what you wrote 10 years ago, and there's just the whole process of writing. So 10 years ago, it may be painful, and you spent lots of energy by doing that, and you see no result, and you feel kind of shame or guilt or whatever. But after 10 years of practice, you write something, and you feel like all sorts of positive emotions. You feel, wow, that's so overwhelmingly beautiful and cool, and it's like spectacular. And it's impossible uh, to what to get to understand unless you can do it on your own. And when you write something amazing, it's like it's a certain experience. And this experience is when I refer to consciousness, I also say when you think, it's not when I say think, I don't mean what people usually mean by thinking, since what they mean by thinking is often it's kind of silly. It's something that takes effort. It's something that it may bring some exciting emotions. It may even cause some no, okay, exciting emotions, doesn't matter. So the idea is that usually people don't like to think, and don't like to think because it's boring, it's stupid. So if you put somebody in a room and ask them to think for 5 hours, they'll just get mad. Like, not everybody, but most of the time they will they will look for something to do. Since if you don't do anything, you get bored quickly, and you can't find anything in your mind just to uh, make yourself busy with. But what I mean by thinking, it's like you try to get rid of all sorts of sensory inputs, shut everything down, not because you don't want to perceive anything, but because you want to think. And thinking makes you so happy. Since you're thinking, it's different level. It's like you just observe the stream of consciousness, like what I'm doing right now. I'm recording my stream of consciousness, and I feel great, like doing this. And I know that is just the beginning. I mean, if I have my standards, and I remember when I was doing the same in Russian, I reached levels which are way higher than what I'm doing right now. And I know that not because it was different language or different expressions, or I felt smarter. No, it was certain emotion. So I was thinking, and after 20 or 30 minutes, I was, wow, this is so amazing. This is so cool. And I continue doing that. I continue talking, and it's like, it just feels different. It's wow. And now it's kind of, no, it's not the same. It feels good still, but I know that if I go on and continue doing that for, next, let's say I record 5-hour videos for the next, like the next year every day. I know that at the end of the year, I will look at myself, at what I was doing today, and laugh, since whatever I'm saying right now is just nonsense. Even if I read this amazing article on consciousness and trying to figure that out, after a year, if I continue this practice, I know uh, in, if I get to the place where I anticipate to be, it's like what I'm doing now. All these feelings and senses is going to be just pale. It's not going to be a reach. And I know the places where just you focus on your thinking, and it makes you so excited and just gives you everything. So you have to stop thinking in order to stay sane. Otherwise, if you just, it was my real experience. So I could, in 2016, I could just turn off the internet for weeks and think during weeks without being, without reading anything, without communicating with people. Just think, write some stories, write some fairy tales, some poems, and it was so bloody exciting. And yeah, but then I realized that I have to, it's also a problem, since you get so deep inside and you don't want to experience anything outside. You basically want to shut off all the doors, all the input, like no internet, no books, no people. Just sit alone at home and think. And you may like, it doesn't mean that you may do it all the time. It's like you may sit there for a week. You may think about something. You may create a story or write your own, like these people, whoever, Tolkien or not Stephen. Okay, maybe Stephen King, but this guy Martin, who Game of Thrones. The Son of Fire and Ice and Fire. It's like you may create like I know. Have you watched Game of Thrones? If you watched it, you may just like this whole world. You may imagine the entire world, and you don't need anything for that. And this is the thinking. But yeah, you may imagine the whole world like the Son of Ice and Fire, or you may imagine the entire world like Kantian metaphysics or Schopenhauer philosophy or Nietzschean philosophy or Hegelian philosophy. It doesn't require anything. This is thinking. And what you say thinking when you just, how to earn 10,000 more rubles a month, or how to approach this girl. It's not thinking. It's like your will, your emotions basically control your thoughts. But what I call thinking is more about when your thoughts are in control and they are free, and you may go wherever you want to go. And it's unbelievable. Anyway, yeah, talking too much. I see. But who cares? Yeah, I'm doing it for myself. I'm studying language, by the way. So it's like whatever I say here, don't take it seriously. I'm studying language. It's fun. I read books here, some articles, Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, trying to figure out what means the word consciousness, trying to apply it to my experience, and trying to talk about it using my own language, just trying to describe how I understand it and practice my pronunciation. All right, the functional question: why does consciousness exist? The functional question: why? Well, yeah, about its origin. Okay, does it have a function? And if so, what is it? So I was talking about it for quite a while. Let's go on. Does it make a difference to the operation systems in which it is present? And if so, why and how? Okay, does it make a difference to the operation of systems in which it is present? So in other words, if I were a robot without consciousness, would I behave in the same way comparatively to being a robot with consciousness, who I am right now, like just a biological robot? But I have consciousness, right? I have something like awareness, perceptions, I have stream of consciousness, and it looks as if robots still haven't had it, hadn't have it, hadn't had it yet. It doesn't make any difference. And again, what does it mean to have consciousness? What kind of consciousness? I mean, it may be just awareness of knowing, like being aware of something, being conscious of certain objects, or being conscious of yourself, or just having senses and feelings. Yeah, feelings certainly change your, your inner state and your behavior, by the way. So if you have consciousness on a sentient level, so you just, your emotions will be different. Your perceptions, your interactions with the world is going to be different. But what means different, right? In other words, let's suppose that you are an organism and you are getting commands all the time, like you have to do this, you have to do that. You don't have consciousness. You're like a robot. So basically, you're like a teapot. So somebody pushes the button and you just boil, and you accomplish a certain command. And let's suppose that we give you consciousness and say, now you're a teapot with consciousness. Will it change anything? Yeah, you will feel perhaps how the water inside you just boils. But will it change anything? You'll still boil the water when it's 100 degree. You just uh, stop doing that. So for the outside, yeah, exactly. For the outside, for an observer from outside, it probably wouldn't change much. But from inside, so you'll have certain experience, and you'll probably might share it with other teapots, and then you'll create some kind of, you'll you'll figure out something, and yeah, your life is going to be richer probably if you're a teapot. But if you're a biological robot like me, you know, consciousness. Yeah, you're also conscious of your emotions, right? It's like not just self-awareness, but no pain and pleasure. So if you're unconscious, there's no pain and pleasure. It seems like there's no pain and pleasure. Therefore, for you to be alive and to be dead makes no difference. But when you have consciousness, right? So you want to survive, you want to be alive, or no, or you want to. Well, the truth is, as soon as you really want to die, it seems that there's nothing that can stop you. But there are certain mechanisms in us that, to die, it's uh, it's not as easy as it may look like. And even if your life is terrible and you experience all sorts of negativity all the time, depression, misery, you still want to live. You still have hope that sometime is going to be changed. Or, you may just, adjust, get used to this and still continue living, since just life may be like a habit. Yeah, but are you conscious of this pain? It's also maybe a question. So, some people live in such a terrible conditions, and they're just unconscious of what's going on. So it seems that if they had self-awareness, they will just die, since, yeah, if they can understand that makes no sense to continue to go on, like it's going to be forever, misery forever, unless you change it. There's two ways of changing it, right? So one way is just die and start from zero, or become zero, become nothing. Or you may try to do something, and consciousness basically, that's how it operates. So it tells you, you don't want to perceive it, you don't like it, do something else, do something different. If you're tired of your life, try to change it. Try to, you know, try to look at it in a different way. Try to understand, why is that the case. Certainly there are some options which you can use to change your life. But you're stuck, right? And you always have excuses and say, no, it's this fucking government. And while we're still under this government, there's no way to change it. or these people, environment, you know, all these bullies in school. If I could have been in a different school, that's probably changed my life and I'll be a different person. But I'm here and I can't go anywhere, and my parents are crazy and whatever, and I have no food to eat and all blah blah blah. And then you go and jerk off. And you do it every day and complain about your environment. Or you go and play video games, or you go and watch TV and movies, you know, and hang out with idiots, play cards, play Seka, waste 10 hours instead of reading Aristotle, Nicomachean Ethics, or Schopenhauer, The World as Will and Idea, or Kant, The Critique of Pure Reason, and The Critique of Practical Reason. It wasn't the critique of practical reason, it was the critique of the ability of judgment. Don't know an English translation, but anyway, there was three critiques: practical reason, pure reason, and what was another one? Kind of ethics, aesthetics, and metaphysics. Yeah, practical reason is more about ethics and morality, and another reason which can try to criticize, not dismiss but criticize, basically explain its function and whatever it does. So it was about aesthetics, about your ability to perceive beauty and what is beauty. Anyway, go on. Let's go on. If consciousness exists as a complex feature of biological systems, then its adaptive value is likely relevant to explaining its evolutionary origin. Though, of course, its present function, if it has one, need not be the same as that it may have had when it first arose. If consciousness exists as a complex feature of biological systems, then its adaptive value is likely relevant to explaining its evolutionary origin. Okay, adaptive value relevant to explaining its evolutionary origin. So biological systems have consciousness. Its adaptive value explaining its evolutionary origin. But what is meant by its? Like biological systems or consciousness? In other words, its adaptive value relevant to explaining the evolutionary origin of the biological systems or the evolutionary origin of consciousness. Okay, biological systems, I guess, but you may interpret it in both ways. Though, of course, its present function, no, it's like in consciousness, right? Its present function, if it has one, need not be the same as that it may have had when it first arose. So it arose to explain the origin, its own origin, but now it may evolve to something else. Adaptive functions often change over biological time. Adaptive functions. What is meant by adaptive functions? Yeah, adaptive value, adaptive functions. So it's about creating kind of harmony between you and your environment. So getting food, whatever. Learning how to interact with other, if you're a human people, right? If you're an animal, other creatures of your species. All right, anyway, questions about the value of consciousness also have a moral dimension in at least two ways. moral dimension. Okay, we are inclined to regard an organism's moral status as at least partly determined by the nature and the extent to which it is conscious. In conscious states, especially conscious affective states, such as pleasure and pains, play a major role in many of the accounts of value that underlie moral theory. The nature and extent to which it is conscious. So questions about the value of consciousness also have a moral dimension. It's more about, it's not about consciousness, it's about conscience, right? So we're inclined to regard an organism's moral status as at least partly determined by the nature and extent to which it's conscious. In conscious states, especially conscious affective states such as pleasures and pains, play a major role in the many of the accounts of value that underlie moral theory. So it's about your actions and how you interact with your environment. There's a moral dimension. But it's such a ugly language. I don't like it. The whole article is ugly. As with the what and how questions, the why question poses a general problem that subdivides into a diversity of more specific inquiries. As with the what and how questions, the why question poses a general problem that subdivides into a diversity of more specific inquiries. Okay, poses a general problem, a diversity of more specific inquiries. Insofar as the various sorts of consciousness, acts of phenomenal metamental, are distinct and separable, they likely also differ in their specific roles and values. Thus, the why question may well not have a single or uniform answer. It's like really, like Wikipedia. It's impossible to read unless you have 50 different purposes in mind. You just want to understand consciousness and want to read this article. It's very hard. And writers who wrote it, yeah, I'm thinking that new topics, and probably, no, I'm inclined, I tend to incline, my language isn't better, by the way. Yeah, I guess it spoils, like reading these articles spoils my language. Since I want to sound better, I want to sound more academic, but instead I sound like a jerk. Anyway, I want to read more original works instead of stupid articles. So I know there are certainly lots of books written about consciousness, and I already regret that I started reading this article since, yeah, I knew that I could spend like these hours by reading some great philosopher or some psychologist who wrote about consciousness. And I guess all these questions were considered, like when you read a book and when you read an article, it's so fucking different. All these links to different researchers. So it's like reading somebody's dissertation. But anyway, yeah, my goal is to understand. Probably after reading this article, of course, I'm going to be. No, I remember when I was reading an article about Courage here on Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, I spent a lot of time, like 10 hours or whatever, reading about Courage, and it helped me to figure everything out. So I was, wow, this article actually was so advantageous, but it was advantageous since it pointed out certain philosophers, and I discovered other books, and I started reading these books instead of focusing only on the article. And then I realized something that I couldn't realize before, especially when I found Aristotelian work, Nicomachean Ethics, which helped me to understand what was like how courage was perceived by ancient people and what is meant, and the dichotomy between foolhardiness and what and fear. Yeah, confidence and fear. No, it was confidence, fear, too much confidence is foolhardy, too much fear is cowardice, and courage is somewhere in between, but it's not exactly in the middle. It's somewhere closer to foolhardiness, and to figure out where it is takes a lot of time and work. All right, let's go on and read it. Perhaps the most basic issue posted by any version of the why question is whether or not consciousness of the relevant sort has any causal impact at all. Once again, perhaps the most basic issue posted by any version of why question is whether or not consciousness of the relevant sort has any causal impact at all. It's like you may think that you have free will, or you may think that you don't have it, but probably your behavior as a body is already like the whole history of your body from the moment it was born to the moment it will die is already predetermined, no matter whether or not you think you have free will. You may think I have free will. It's also predetermined by the history of your of your organism. And consciousness itself, from this point of view, it's like, yeah, you are aware, you think that you understand what's going on, but at the same time you're aware that whatever is going on is just doesn't matter whether you will be aware or not. It's the same way, but awareness gives you some some advantages. But what kind of advantages? Maybe it's more adaptative to not be aware. Yeah, but complexity, right? All these richness of experience and spiritual pursuits and poetry and philosophy. Probably it's not going to be there if we had no consciousness, right? The whole evolution on Earth, evolution of life, created this amazing thing, or it was there before evolution, but it didn't have such perspectives, and it was kind of limited. All right. If it has no effects and makes no causal difference whatsoever, then it would seem unable to play any significant role in the systems or organisms in which it is present, thus undercutting at the outset most inquiries about its possible value. Nor can the threat of epiphenomenal irrelevance be simply dismissed as an obvious non-option, since at least some forms of consciousness have been seriously alleged in the recent literature to lack causal status. See the entry on epiphenomenalism. Sorry, not today. Such worries have been raised especially with regard to qualia and qualitative consciousness. But challenges have also been leveled against the causal status of other sorts, including meta-mental consciousness. No, I'm tired of reading this article, seriously. I mean, I understand that it makes a lot of sense, and I'm just probably tired, my intellectual, energy. I'm talking for a couple of hours, and before I was practicing my pronunciation for a couple of hours, and before I was doing physical exercise. But before physical exercise, I was also doing some intellectual work for half an hour, and it seems that my mind, I may go on, of course, but there's some sense of tiredness, and I know that the further I go, the less clear it's going to be, and there's probably going to be more noise in whatever I'm going to say. So I'm not going to read this. I'm not going to go further. So I'm going to stop here today. So basically, I've read just one, an intro to the functional question: why does consciousness exists? So I'm going to read alone after finishing this video. I'm going to read today like the chapter 6. There's about free will, something like just freedom of will. I'd like to talk about it, but not now. Intrinsic motivation, constitutive and contingent roles, theories of consciousness, metaphysics of consciousness. Well, actually, I don't have a lot of time to read, but at least, I'm gonna read. I'm gonna read the whole 6th section alone, not analyzing each sentence and not talking about my experience and some ideas which emerge while I'm just reading these sentences and trying to analyze them. So I'm going to read it fast, probably find some phrases and words and concepts and ideas which may be useful. And tomorrow I'll probably record one more video where I'll talk about these ideas. But I didn't manage to read the whole article, so it wasn't enough for me. I was reading it for 4 days. No, for 3 days. The first day I spent reading definitions on Wikipedia and other sites, and I also was searching for quotes and talking about these quotes. So, but in general, I spent 4 days studying the concept for about 10 hours, recording myself. And also I spent probably 5 or 10 hours watching videos. By the way, yesterday I also watched a video by a guy named, I'm just going to show what was the video. What was the video? This one. Yeah. The Source of Consciousness with Mark Solms. So this guy basically claimed that consciousness emerges not in narrow cortex, not in the frontal, again, cortex and stem. And he claimed that consciousness located, the self, the I is located in the stem, in, I guess he said, in reticular activating system, RAS. And he gave 4 examples or five examples. He wrote a book actually, which probably was titled exactly like The Source of Consciousness. He was a clinical neuropsychologist, and he studied certain patients. And he said, his examples were basically, there are some patients without neurocortex, but they still had consciousness. And by consciousness, he meant feelings and emotions, even though they couldn't describe, they couldn't talk, but they still had emotions. So some people could talk even without having prefrontal, this prefrontal cortex, not cortex, but cortex, right? And his idea was that, he said when he was a child, he had a brother, and his brother had some trauma, physical trauma. He fell down on his head and lost some, there were some problems in his brain. Were lots of blood, and it somehow determined the course of life of this guy, Mark Solms. And he became he started studying neurophysiology. And when he was a professor, when he was a student, professors told him that consciousness, it's in neurocortex. And he said he believed that it wasn't there, and he created his own theory that consciousness, and by consciousness he meant I, or ego, something that perceives, something that have this experience, something that gets all this visual and auditory and all sorts of data from the outer world. And he believed that it's in reticular activating system. It's located there. And it was so fun. I mean, this guy is quite old, maybe 70 years old, and he spent his whole life and career just trying to prove some stupid theory that I is located in certain place in the body. and not in the neurocortex, but in a reticular activating system. And of course, he was talking about one type of consciousness, even though he not differentiated it. He didn't say like, there's many different type of consciousness. He said consciousness is this, and I know what it is, and I know where it is, and this is why. And this was the lecture, and later I read all these comments, and most of these comments were, you are such a brilliant researcher. You gave us so much knowledge, and it was so amazing. And I was, what? Really? Like all these people believe this crap which this guy says? Impossible. And I read my own comment here. So I'm going to read the comment, and I'm going to finish my video here today. I guess I'll extend my studies of consciousness for the next week. So I want to finish reading this article, and I see now that I won't be able to do it tomorrow since there's like 3 chapters, and I want to go slower, and I want to watch a few more videos about consciousness. So I'll extend my studies to next week, and next week we are going to continue talking about consciousness at our speaking club, and probably I'll finish this article and maybe find some book, and we'll try to read some original book. But my comment, I'm going to read this comment and finish this video here. Oh, what did I do? No, get back. It's my channel. Stop it. So you can't be unconscious of your feelings. Oh, it's like his claim. His claim, actually, one of his claim was that you may be unconscious of your thoughts, but whenever you feel something, it's like you're always conscious of your feelings. So you feel pain, and you're always conscious of it. You feel pleasure, you're always conscious of it. Whereas when you have thoughts, you may don't pay attention to them. And he gave some examples showing like MRI or like brain scans, and how people, had feelings, like some proofs that prove that you may have thoughts, unconscious thoughts, but you can't have unconscious feelings. And I like stated his claim. So you can't be unconscious of your feelings, really. How about forgetting hunger, guilt, headache, and all sorts of physical pains while playing video games 100 hours in a row and dying afterward? The so-called I resided in a reticular activating system and responsible for maintaining homeostasis, looks as convincing as Zeus sitting on the cloud and controlling the weather. That was my comment. Yeah, maybe it's a little bit rude, but just the way how I see it. Video games, right? So it's a valid example. There are lots of people who die, like not lots of, but there are people who die being like not just in their thoughts, but in this virtual world, playing video games and completely dismissing their senses. So their body, and he said like consciousness and feelings are here because they're responsible for maintaining homeostasis, and this is where consciousness emerged from, and this is it's more important than your neurocortex. And like neurocortex basically make you play video games and forget about everything, forget about hunger, forget about all sorts of pains, and people die. I mean, there are some examples when you play video games and die because you don't have food. You're so excited about playing video games that you can't go and eat something, and then you die. And then you say, no, consciousness there. Yeah, I mean, people write books like that, and they had lots of credit. And that's cool. I mean, I don't dismiss it. That's just my perception. Anyway, thank you for watching. See you next time.